Shark Media.
On February 11th, 2013, a small group of cardinals gathered in the consistory hall of the Apostolic Palace for what they believed was a routine meeting. Pope Benedict XVI, nearly 8 years into his pontificate, was scheduled to make several announcements about upcoming canonizations. The cardinals listened with polite attention as the 85-year-old pontiff began speaking in Latin, the ancient language of church business. What they heard next left them stunned into silence. This is white smoke, the Pope who stepped down. I declare that I renounce the ministry of Bishop of Rome, successor of St. Peter. Benedict read from a single sheet of paper, his voice steady but soft. For this, a life of prayer and reflection would be more suitable. The cardinals stared in disbelief. No pope had voluntarily resigned in nearly 600 years. Many present did not immediately comprehend what they had just witnessed. So unthinkable was the notion of a papal resignation in the modern era. Cardinal Angelo Sodano, Dean of the College of Cardinals, was the first to recover his composure. "This news catches us by surprise, like a bolt from the blue," he said. Several cardinals later admitted they wondered if they had misunderstood the Latin. One reported checking with colleagues to confirm what had happened. The Vatican's official translator, sitting nearby, had tears streaming down her face as she realized the historic significance of the moment. The resignation of a pope had last occurred in 1415, when Gregory XII stepped down to end the Western schism that had divided the Church with competing papal claimants. Before that, the most notable resignation was that of Celestine V in 1294, a hermit pope overwhelmed by the office who resigned after just 5 months. Many scholars believe Dante referenced Celestine in Inferno as he who made the great refusal, seeing his resignation as an act of cowardice. The precedent was not encouraging. Benedict's announcement, delivered in his characteristically quiet manner, sent shockwaves through the Catholic Church and beyond. Vatican insiders had noticed his increasing frailty. He had begun using a mobile platform to navigate the long aisle of St. Peter's Basilica, and his schedule had been gradually reduced. Yet no one had suspected he might take the extraordinary step of resigning the papacy, an office traditionally held until death. "I have come to the certainty that my strengths, due to an advanced age, are no longer suited to an adequate exercise of the Petrine ministry," he explained in his declaration. With these carefully chosen words, Benedict XVI redefined the modern papacy. What had been viewed as a divine calling that could not be relinquished was now, in his hands, a ministry that required physical and mental vigor to exercise properly. Within hours, the news dominated global headlines. Around St. Peter's Square, tourists and pilgrims gathered in confused clusters, checking their phones for updates and asking each other if it could really be true. Inside the Vatican, officials scrambled to address practical and canonical questions for which there were no modern precedents. What would Benedict be called? Where would he live? What would be his relationship to his successor? Father Federico Lombardi, the Vatican spokesman, called a hastily arranged press conference. "The Pope has announced that he doesn't have the strength to carry on with his ministry," he explained to the packed room of journalists. "This isn't a political decision that might be changed. It's a physical and spiritual question." Lombardi revealed that Benedict had made his decision many months ago, after his trip to Mexico and Cuba in March 2012, when the challenges of international travel became increasingly apparent. In the preceding years, Benedict's papacy had faced mounting difficulties. The global sex abuse crisis continued to erode trust in church leadership. The Fati Leaks scandal, in which the Pope's personal butler had leaked confidential documents revealing corruption and infighting within the Curia, had been a personal betrayal that visibly affected the aging pontiff. Financial reforms of the Vatican Bank had stalled amid resistance from entrenched interests. Vatican correspondent John Allen noted, Benedict was elected to be the theological and spiritual leader of the Catholic Church, not a managerial reformer. The administrative burdens of the modern papacy clearly weighed heavily on him. Indeed, Benedict had never sought the papal office. As Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, he had hoped to retire to his native Bavaria to write and study before John Paul II's death changed his plans. Now, approaching his 86th birthday, his declining health was widely observed. Though the Vatican did not publicly disclose specific medical details, Benedict made the decision that would define his place in church history as much as any theological writing or papal pronouncement. He would step aside voluntarily, breaking with centuries of tradition that held a pope must die in office. In the days following the announcement, Benedict maintained his scheduled appointments while preparations began for the sede vacante, the vacant seat of Peter. Canon lawyers confirmed that according to church law, his resignation would take effect on February 28th at 8 p.m, precisely the time he had specified in his declaration. After that moment, the church would be without a pope until a new conclave could elect his successor. The logistics of a papal resignation proved complex. No protocols existed for a former pope's title, dress, or residence. After consultation, it was announced that Benedict would be known as Pope Emeritus, or Roman Pontiff Emeritus. Newly created titles that acknowledged his former position while clarifying he no longer held papal authority. He would continue to wear white, but would give up the red papal shoes and the fisherman's ring, which would be destroyed according to custom. On February 27th, Benedict held his final general audience in St. Peter's Square before a crowd of 150,000 people. I took this step in full awareness of its gravity and rarity, but also with profound serenity of mind, he told the emotional gathering. In an unusually personal reflection, he added, "The Lord gave us days of sun and light breeze, days in which the fishing was abundant. There were also moments when the waters were agitated and the wind contrary, and the Lord seemed to be sleeping." That evening, emotion overcame the normally reserved pontiff as he met with the cardinals who had served under him. "Among you is the future pope, to whom I promise my unconditional reverence and obedience," he said, his voice breaking slightly. These words would later prove significant, establishing a precedent for his relationship with his successor. On his final day as Pope, February 28th, Benedict met with the full College of Cardinals in the Clementine Hall. Cardinal Angelo Sodano, speaking for the group, thanked him for his selfless service. Then, in a scene broadcast worldwide, the Pope greeted each cardinal individually, many of whom struggled to maintain their composure. At 4:30 that afternoon, Benedict departed the Apostolic Palace for the last time. As he walked through the frescoed halls, members of the pontifical household lined up to bid him farewell. The Swiss Guard, papal gentlemen, and household staff, many in tears, formed an honor guard as he made his way to the San Damaso courtyard, where a helicopter of the Italian Air Force awaited. Benedict's final journey as Pope was brief but symbolic, a 15-minute flight from Vatican City to Castel Gandolfo, the papal summer residence in the Alban Hills outside Rome. As the white helicopter lifted off, bells rang throughout Rome. It circled St. Peter's Basilica in a final salute before heading southeast toward the 16th century palace where Benedict would spend the first 2 months of his retirement. At Castel Gandolfo, a crowd had gathered in the small town square outside the papal villa. At 5:30, Benedict appeared on the balcony overlooking the square. "I am simply a pilgrim beginning the last leg of his pilgrimage on this earth," he told them. "I wish still with my heart, my love, my prayer, my reflection, with all my inner strength, to work for the common good and the good of the Church and of humanity." At 8 p.m. precisely, as specified in his declaration, Benedict's resignation took effect. The Swiss guards stationed at the entrance to Castel Gandolfo ceremonially departed, their duty to protect the Pope now complete until a new pontiff was elected. Inside the papal villa, Archbishop Georg Genswein, Benedict's longtime personal secretary, who would continue to serve him in retirement, reportedly broke down in tears. Back in Rome, Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone, as Camerlengo of the Holy Roman Church, officially sealed the papal apartment in the Apostolic Palace. The fisherman's ring and papal seal were ceremonially destroyed by scoring them with an X-shaped cut, ensuring they could not be used to authenticate documents during the sede vacante. The Vatican now entered uncharted territory, a papal transition not marked by mourning and funeral rites, but by the unprecedented situation of a living former pope. The College of Cardinals began informal discussions about the challenges facing the Church and the qualities needed in Benedict's successor. For the first time since the advent of modern media, cardinals could discuss the state of the Church without the constraint of appearing disrespectful to a deceased pontiff. Their pre-conclave meetings, known as general congregations, addressed a range of issues: the ongoing sex abuse crisis, governance reform of the Roman Curia, declining religious practice in traditional Catholic strongholds, and the shifting centre of gravity of global Catholicism toward the Southern Hemisphere. 115 cardinals would be eligible to vote in the upcoming conclave, with the date set for March 12th. Unlike in 2005, when Cardinal Ratzinger had been the clear frontrunner, no obvious successor to Benedict emerged in preliminary discussions. Several papabili, potential popes, were mentioned in Vatican circles. Cardinal Angelo Scola of Milan, Cardinal Marc Ouellet of Canada, Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York, and several Latin American cardinals, including Jorge Mario Bergoglio of Buenos Aires. As cardinals from around the world arrived in Rome, Benedict remained secluded at Castel Gandolfo, consciously removing himself from the process of selecting his successor. He had promised not to interfere, though his shadow inevitably loomed over the proceedings. Never before had cardinals needed to select a new pope while his predecessor remained alive. For the Catholic Church, Benedict's decision represented a profound shift in understanding of the papacy. As theologian George Weigel observed, Benedict has reminded us that the papacy is not a monarchy, but a ministry. By resigning, he emphasized that the office exists to serve the Church, not to provide its occupant with power or status. The reasons for Benedict's historic decision remained subject to speculation. Vatican officials maintained it was solely due to his declining physical strength, citing his difficulty walking and his need for increased rest. Yet others pointed to the accumulated burdens of his papacy. The Vati leaks scandal had reportedly resulted in a confidential Vatican investigation that some believe influenced his decision, while the sex abuse crisis continued to demand energy and attention he could no longer provide. Italian journalist Gianluigi Nuzzi, who had published some of the leaked Vatican documents, claimed Benedict realized he was too weak to clean up the corruption. Conservative Catholic writer Rod Dreher suggested he may have concluded that the Church needs a younger, more vigorous pope to face these challenges. Others noted his intellectual honesty. If he believed he could not fulfill his duties adequately, his conscience would not allow him to continue. Whatever his full reasons, Benedict's decision permanently altered the institution of the papacy. Future popes would serve knowing that resignation was a legitimate option if their health failed. The mystical notion that a pope must suffer and die in office, as his predecessor John Paul II had done, was replaced by a more pragmatic understanding of papal ministry as requiring adequate physical and mental capacity. In the quiet of Castel Gandolfo, Benedict followed news of the pre-conclave developments through television and newspapers. Archbishop Genswein reported that the Pope Emeritus spent much of his time in prayer for the cardinals who would select his successor. He is at peace with his decision, Genswein told journalists. He believes it was God's will. As the cardinals prepared to enter conclave, one question lingered. What kind of pope would follow Benedict XVI? Would they choose continuity with Benedict's traditional theological approach, or opt for someone who might take the church in a new direction? The answer would come more quickly than anyone expected. For the first time in the church's 2,000-year history, a conclave would elect a successor to a living pope. Benedict had changed the papacy forever, transforming an office traditionally surrendered only in death into one that could be relinquished when human frailty demanded it. In doing so, he had demonstrated both rare humility and remarkable courage. Benedict XVI's final act as pope may have been his most consequential. By stepping down, he paved the way for reforms he himself had not been able to implement. He surrendered power voluntarily, something few leaders in any sphere willingly do, because he believed it was best for the institution he served. The man who had entered the papacy in the shadow of John Paul II had found his own way to make history. Not through grand gestures or global travels, but through a quiet act of renunciation that redefined the oldest continuing office in the world. The theologian Pope's final lesson was not about doctrine or liturgy, but about the nature of leadership itself. As dusk fell on February 28th, the sede vacante officially began. The papal apartment stood empty, the apostolic palace fell silent, and in the small town of Castel Gandolfo, a man who had been pope just hours before knelt in private prayer. His extraordinary journey as supreme pontiff complete, while in Rome, the cardinals prepared to write the next chapter in the church's long history. Every papal transition writes a new chapter in the church's history. The resignation of Benedict XVI wrote one of its most unexpected. White Smoke is a production of Calaroga Shark Media, portions of which were made with the help of AI narration.